Tonight, the government moves to tackle the Russian threat at home and abroad after a new report on the 2018 Russian attack on UK soil. An inquiry finds Vladimir Putin morally responsible for the death of Dawn Sturgis from a nerve agent in Salisbury, as the government imposes new sanctions on Russia and summons her ambassador. Sir Keir Starmer condemns the Kremlin's reckless disregard for innocent lives as he announces a naval alliance with Norway to tackle the Russian threat at sea. Also tonight, we speak to a school contemporary of Nigel Farage after he accused the BBC of double standards over allegations he used racist remarks while at school.
At the time I was elected to have made these remarks, one of your most popular weekly shows was the Black and White Minstrels, right? The BBC were very happy to use blackface.
That comes as his party gets a multi-million-pound boost from one of the biggest ever individual donations. But who is the man behind it? And what does it tell us about the trajectory of British politics? Flu cases in the NHS hit a record high, with latest data showing the winter pressure on the health service. And as celebrity traitor star Cat Burns tops the Google Trends chart for this year, we'll look at what the data tells us about the political moments that have cut through with the public. Trending with us tonight, Tim Montgomery and Hannah Bardell. They'll be with us for the next hour. It's Thursday. I'm Ali Fortescue, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. The government today announced more sanctions targeting Russia after the release of a report into the Salisbury poisonings in 2018. Mother of three, Dawn Sturgis, died after she sprayed herself with the nerve agent Novichok, thinking it was perfume. The report concluded that Vladimir Putin and his agents were morally responsible for her death. Dan Whitehead has the story.
An assassination attempt from the top of the Kremlin, with a Wiltshire mother caught in the deadly crossfire. 7 years on from the Novichok poisonings in Salisbury, the inquiry into Dawn Sturgis's death has published its findings.
Her death was needless and arbitrary. She was the entirely innocent victim of the cruel and cynical acts of others.
March 2018, it was former Russian spy Sergei Skripal who was the target of the poisoning. Two Russian GRU agents, who later claimed to be tourists, were captured on CCTV wandering the back streets of Salisbury. They're accused of smearing the military-grade chemical weapon on the front door handle of Sergei's home. He and his daughter Yulia were found slumped on a bench just hours later, but ultimately survived. More than 80 others attended A&E, with a police officer hospitalised. Fast forward 4 months, and 999 calls from Dawn's boyfriend Charlie Rowley come in. She was frothing at the mouth after spraying what she thought was perfume on herself. But inside the bottle, Novichok, enough, the inquiry heard, to kill thousands. The £8.3 million inquiry heard evidence from 40 witnesses over 7 weeks. It found that the 3 Russian agents who attacked Sergei Skripal with a chemical weapon were authorised at the highest level. They and President Vladimir Putin were morally responsible for Dawn Sturgis's death. It found there were failings by the British state in the management of Skripal as an exchanged prisoner, but agreed with the assessment at the time that he was not a significant risk of assassination. When it came to the treatment of Dawn Sturgis, the inquiry ruled she received entirely appropriate medical care, and that her condition was in fact unsurvivable from a very early stage. Russia has always denied any involvement in the assassination attempt against the Skripals and Dawn's subsequent death. Despite this, the findings in the inquiry have led to fresh repercussions against Russia. Sanctions against the GRU intelligence unit responsible for the original attack against the Skripals, the ambassador summoned to the UK Foreign Office.
This report is clear. Moral responsibility lies with Putin, and it's further evidence of the shocking and reckless, hostile activity on UK soil.
For Dawn's family, it has been a long wait for answers.
Skripal was described by Putin as a traitor and convicted of treason. Yet, there were no sufficient and regular assessments of the risks he faced from Russian retaliation. As we have always believed, that put the British public at risk and led to Dawn's death.
We can have Dawn back now. She's been public for 7 years. We can finally put her to peace.
Perhaps some closure for Dawn's family and a Wiltshire city keen to move on from being at the centre of world attention. For UK-Russia relations, though, today's findings are yet another increase in growing tensions. Dan Whitehead, Sky News.
Well, in a clear sign that the threat of Russia is as present as ever, also today the UK and Norway signed a naval pact to operate a combined fleet to hunt Russian submarines in the North Atlantic. Keir Starmer and his Norwegian counterpart met at Downing Street to sign that deal, which they say will improve the UK's ability to protect its key infrastructure. The pair then travelled to Scotland to meet with patrol crews who've been tracking Russian vessels, including the spy ship, which was recently accused of pointing lasers to disrupt RAF pilots. Let's bring in our panel for this evening, shall we? Tim Montgomery of Reform and Hannah Bardell of the SNP. Thank you so much for coming in. Lasers being pointed at RAF pilots. I mean, Tim, it's pretty extraordinary when you actually start to think about what is going on behind the scenes.
Well, you just wonder, really, we've had Russian fighters infringing upon NATO airspace. We've had my own city. I live in Salisbury. I remember the whole poisoning drama incredibly well, the economic implications. People were very frightened. We've had people assassinated in London at Russia's hands. You just wonder when we really will take this threat seriously. I think there are signs of it, but a lot of it is dependent actually upon Donald Trump, funnily enough, who is not the most active against Russia, but he has forced at least NATO to start spending a proper amount of money on our defence. Europe has freeloaded really on America for a long time, and until we have the capacity to actually defend ourselves, I don't think we are taking Russia seriously.
Do we have the capacity to defend ourselves?
Doesn't feel like it. And when you look at that report and the tragedy of Dawn Sturgis's death and the impact in Salisbury, I was sitting on the sanctions and anti-money laundering bill in Parliament when that happened. And before it happened, there wasn't really much appetite in challenging Russia and in challenging the river of dirty money that continues to flow through the financial systems of the UK. And then that happened and it was like all of a sudden people suddenly woke up to the threat. But, it's broader than this. There's a report today in the iPaper about Russian spies coming in on cargo ships through our ports. And, we've had members of Reform taking bribes from and being jailed.
One person has been prosecuted,
yeah, one person's been prosecuted, but that is significant, 10 years in jail. So the infiltration, not just of our defences, but our political systems, is a really massive issue.
Does Reform have a Russia problem?
No, if you look at the position of the party, so, for example, Nigel Farage supports Ukraine membership of NATO. We have backed, as a party, every single arms equipment bill for Ukraine. We're absolutely no friend of what Putin is doing. I come from Salisbury. My city was, we almost had a pandemic before the UK-wide pandemic. It was blighted by that Russian intervention. And if that poison had been slightly differently applied, thousands of people would have died, and the consequences of that would have been enormous. So I would not be part of any party that didn't take Russia seriously. It was a disgrace what happened with the former Welsh leader of our party, but he's been properly dealt with, and I'm glad he's going to prison for a long time because he was a traitor. He was a traitor to his own country. And one thing Nigel Farage is definitely not is a traitor to his own country.
Would the SNP be able to stand up to Vladimir Putin? I mean, it's hard to see, it's hard to know what we can do, really.
Well,
he won't care right now that he's been found morally responsible for Dawn Sturgis's
No, of course he
death.
won't. He couldn't give two hoots, I'm sure, and no doubt will be cheering from the Kremlin. And that's the most disturbing thing. What we have to be really, really cognizant of is the cuts over many, many decades to our conventional defences. And the SNP, and to be fair, many other parties have called for that. Keir Starmer was in Scotland today. Scotland has been at the forefront of this. We were in a position a few years ago that our fishing fleets were identifying threats from Russia over our defence forces.
Wow.
And that is because we have had such brutal cuts to those conventional defences. And the UK government want to invest in things like nuclear weapons that are never going to be used and are a complete waste of money over supporting our military personnel and indeed our veterans who are there at the forefront of this. And that is how we would do it in an independent country.
Hang on, it shouldn't be a choice. We need a nuclear deterrent as well. We need a nuclear deterrent because that is the powerful weapon that has kept the peace since the Second World War. I don't like the idea of nuclear weapons, but so long as they exist, I want us to have them. Because if we don't have them, I can assure you Russia will still have them and our enemies will still have us. And then we're in the weak position of being intimidated.
I think you'll find it's more to do with the cohesive approach that we've had in Europe. You know, I know Reform have a very different view on the Convention on Human Rights, but that project, that European project, has helped keep peace. It hasn't been nuclear weapons.
Let viewers decide. I think that's nonsense.
OK, thank you both. We're going to come back to you. In the past hour, I should say, I sat down with the former Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, and I started by asking him about that naval alliance. The Prime Minister today has been talking to the Norwegian Prime Minister. They've been talking about hunting Russian submarines underwater. I mean, you know more about this than me. What's actually happening underwater?
Look, this is an extremely important agreement, and it's one that I hope will, in due course, bring in Sweden and Finland as various countries in the region buy the new Type 31, or at least I hope they buy the new Type 31 ship that helps you to chase submarines. What we're seeing, of course, is we're seeing Russian submarines emerging out of ports, mostly further north, but also a few going into the Baltic, and effectively threatening different elements of our commerce and our military capability, and attempting to put pressure on countries like the Baltic states and Poland. So this is an extremely welcome agreement, a very strong echo of the agreements that we had in the Second World War that is remembered because, of course, the Christmas tree in Trafalgar Square is that permanent memorial for that.
We also have seen today the report into the poisoning of Dawn Sturgis. The Russian ambassador has been summoned. There have been more sanctions. Do any of these sanctions actually have any teeth? You know, is this all talk? Is it going to make...
Well, I've got to be honest. We've sanctioned so much out of Russia over the last few years that it's not so much they don't have any teeth. It's more that, you know, we've broken off so many relationships. It's very hard to break off any more. But the reality is this report makes something extremely clear. And I think it's very important that we remember this. Russia has been conducting warlike activities against the United Kingdom now for nearly a decade. In the last year, we've seen sabotage of factories, of warehouses. Before that, we saw the attack on the Skripals, which, had it been raining and had the bottle fallen into the drain, could easily have killed tens of thousands of people. And of course, before that, we had the attack on Litvinenko using polonium, a chemical, nuclear chemical, that meant that the plane that it was carried in on had to be scrapped. This is not just a rogue regime. This is a regime that is perfectly content to murder thousands of people in order to achieve its aims. This is a brutal regime, and the idea that they are in any way able to be our allies is complete rubbish. They are very, very hostile to the United Kingdom. They are trying to kill British citizens today.
As you talk about the Russian actions. Are we prepared for that? Are we strong enough right now?
Well, I think there's a lot more we should do. I mean, frankly, over the last 30 years, we've taken various different peace dividends, which have reduced our armed forces and diminished our capabilities. Our intelligence services are still extremely capable.
When the Tories were in power, I should say. Real terms funding fell by 22% between 2009 and 2016. I mean, that was under the Conservatives.
Well, the reality is it's been for 30 years that we've been taking peace dividends off the table. And it started with the end of the Cold War, quite understandably. But, you know, despite having gone to war in Sierra Leone, in Kosovo, in Bosnia, having seen operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, we didn't see an increase in defence. And when we got to the war in Libya in 2011, it became perfectly obvious that we didn't have the war stocks to sustain our own operations. So the truth is, you can blame one party or the other if you like. I'm frankly not interested in party blame. What is simply true is that for 30 years we have not invested properly in defence under any administration, under any prime minister and under any defence secretary. And I'm afraid it's still true today. It is very likely that we're going to see defence cuts this year, cuts in the army, cuts in the navy and cuts in the air force, despite the SDSR that was launched with such fanfare a little while ago.
Well, they have pledged to go further than you have. They've talked about 3.5%. They say they're getting...
Yeah, after the next election. After the next election, which means they promised nothing. Sorry?
That's more than the Conservatives pledged.
Well, I can promise you an elephant if I've no intention of delivering it. I mean, you know, the fact is that they're making completely meaningless promises. If they're not even willing to pay for the SDSR that they commissioned, then frankly, they should have saved the paper. It's a complete waste of time. As George Robertson put it himself. Now, George Robertson, former Labour Defence Secretary, who was instrumental in writing the SDSR, he was one of the three authors of it, he gave that very clear warning in an interview only, I think it was yesterday or the day before, saying that effectively the Treasury had signed up for this when they signed up to the SDSR. And if they weren't willing to put the money where their mouth was, well, you know, then effectively they were ordering cuts. So, you know, I mean, I completely agree that parties of all stripes have failed to invest in defence over the last 30 years. And it's something that I've been warning about in Parliament now for 10 years, ever since I was elected. But the reality is, you know, the bill is coming due, and the bill is coming due because we're seeing what Russia is doing to Ukraine. We know what Russia is doing to the United Kingdom. We know what Russia is doing, setting fire to war stocks and setting fire to arms establishments in places like the Czech Republic and around the place, and attempting to murder the Prime Minister of Montenegro. You know, we know what's going on. It's not a secret. It's actually pretty open. And the reality is we now have a choice. Are we going to be serious about this or not? You know, the other day we had the Yantar, a Russian spy vessel, in our waters, and we had barely the capability to follow it, let alone to chase it out of our own waters. You know, we are now at a very, very low ebb. And frankly, this is no longer acceptable.
OK, Tom Tugnat, thank you so much for coming on the Politics Hub this evening.
Thank you.
You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, Nigel Farage launches a tirade against the BBC over accusations of racism while he was at school.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Nigel Farage today launched a scathing attack on the BBC, demanding an apology after being quizzed about claims of racism while he was a student. The Reform UK leader slammed the BBC's Today programme for asking a member of his party about alleged incidents in the 70s when he was at school. He even read a letter from a former schoolmate, which he says clears his name.
I've received many letters over the course of the last few days from people that I was at school with. This one I think is particularly relevant. I was a Jewish pupil at Dulwich College at the same time, and I remember him very well. While there was plenty of macho, tongue-in-cheek schoolboy banter, it was humour. And yes, sometimes it was offensive, rather like most of the BBC's output, but never with malice. I never heard him racially abuse anyone. If he had, he would have been reported and punished. He wasn't. The news stories are without evidence except for belatedly politically dubious recollections from nearly half a century ago.
Well, he then went on to turn his attention to the BBC.
Are you surprised that 500,000 people every year refuse to pay the licence fee? But let me say this to you. The double standards and hypocrisy of the BBC are absolutely astonishing. At the time I was alleged to have made these remarks, one of your most popular weekly shows was the Black and White Minstrels, right? The BBC were very happy to use blackface. Oh, and not just in the Black and White Minstrels, you did it in It Ain't Half Hot Mum as well. I cannot put up with the double standards of the BBC about what I'm alleged to have said 49 years ago and what you were putting out on mainstream content. So I want an apology from the BBC for virtually everything you did throughout the 1970s and 80s.
Well, as you can see, our panel's still with us. We'll come to you in a moment. But first, let's talk to our chief political correspondent, John Craig. There's a lot of context here, isn't there? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, this row's been rumbling on for weeks. I mean, actually, the allegations were first made in a book by the journalist Michael Crick in 2021. In fact, there were even claims before then. And so this has been going on. The Guardian has really taken up the story. The BBC then took up the story. And as you've heard, Mr Farage's ire was directed at the BBC. Rather more than The Guardian, actually. The Guardian were complaining later on they never got called at the news conference. The news conference was called to attack the government's plans for postponing mayoral elections. Monstrous, Mr Farage said. But then the first question he took from the BBC, clearly planning to have a go at them. And you've heard what he said. There was the quote from the letter, and then he absolutely turned on the BBC journalist who didn't really know what had hit him. It was an absolute tirade. He, of course, is very cross about all this, as you've heard him say. It was all a long time ago. And he read out, that's the first time we've heard him read out a letter, a supporting letter, because one or two of his former pupils, fellow pupils, have given interviews to The Guardian and in particular to the BBC and some other broadcasters as well. Now, the reaction to that outburst from Mr Farage was from the Tories said that he'd claimed that the Tories claimed that he'd admitted the allegations were true. I'm not sure about that. The Labour Party, Anna Turley, their chair, said Mr Farage can't get his story straight. So far, he's claimed he can't remember. It's not true. He never directly abused anyone. That he was responsible for offensive banter. Now, I recall in October he said, not true, and then he gave an interview at they had a rally in Llandudno a few weeks back, and he gave an interview in which he used the phrase banter in the playground. And I noticed that the fellow pupil in his letter to Mr Farage used that word banter as well. But if Mr Farage thought coming out fighting was going to make this row go away, I don't think it is at all, because I think the BBC and The Guardian will pursue it, and clearly Labour and the Conservatives will pursue it.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. Let's bring our panel back in, Tim and Claire. Tim, I mean, it feels like this has got under Nigel Farage's skin.
Yeah, I think it's upset him. I spoke to him last week about this, and he's very upset because if you look at what I have seen and what most... He's probably one of the most long-standing friends of Britain's Jewish community. You know, he backs Israel. In his adult political life, he's been staunch in this regard. And I don't know what happened at school in his school years, but I think there's something deeply shameful for the British media, actually, the way they're pursuing the story. They're pursuing something about when someone was young, you know, and we all, you know, what was it George W. Bush said? When I was young and irresponsible, I was young and irresponsible. It's the nearest to truth I've heard from a politician. The fact that his school life is being probed when he was still an individual being formed, I think it's disgusting, actually. And I think... And ordinary people out there, I know they think it's disgusting. And they think that the British media, which doesn't hold politicians accountable properly to their performance in office, you know, there's plenty of issues that people are worried about. They're talking about someone's school years. And I would be really offended if I was Nigel Farage as well. I don't think he's handled it that well. I think he should be lighter in his response rather than show up as he is. But what you are seeing is real from him. He feels deeply offended that he is being judged by a standard...
So you're saying even if it is true, these allegations...
Well, I don't know. I don't... but, you know, Wes Streeting, the health secretary, you know, he tweeted in his adult life horrible things. I've not seen the British media go for Wes Streeting on that. And so there is a bias issue here, I'm afraid, as well. And if you're going to pursue this standard, at least pursue it equally against all politicians rather than just one.
Hannah, is there a bias issue here, as Tim suggests?
I don't think so. I mean, I think he's been called out and challenged for stuff that was pretty horrific, and perhaps there's a bit of just desserts there. He's probably feeling just a dash of what the person that he bullied felt, and that isn't very nice, I can imagine. But at the end of the day, if you put yourself forward to be a politician, you put yourself forward for the highest level of scrutiny, and there... You know, it would appear...
When you were a child?
I think what's really interesting is the double standards, because if you remember the comments that he made back in the day about Shamima Begum and her joining ISIS and the age that she was at the time, it's the same age, and he made it very clear that she knew exactly what she was doing, that she was fully responsible for her actions. Same age as he was when he made these comments. So, you know, at the end of the day, when you come at people with and into the public domain with these kind of double standards, and I think the thing that really struck me today was a kind of thin-skinned, petulant schoolboy response. It's like he's never grown up, or he's been taken back to that moment and he's, you know, having this response. And he made that comment about the BBC. It all felt very staged to me. The difference is the BBC then and the BBC now. The BBC has grown up and it has changed. Doesn't feel like he has. Some of the policies that Reform are pursuing, some of the rhetoric, the anti-migrant rhetoric that's being pursued, doesn't really feel to me like they've moved on and grown up in the way that society has to be much more inclusive and diverse. It feels like we're going backwards with Reform.
He clearly planned it because he had the letter to read out and he called the BBC first, and whereas perhaps he might have called somebody else first. We were second, Sam Coates was second. But he clearly wanted to attack the BBC today. Isn't it about politicians' character? This time last night we were talking about Rachel Reeves and claims that she won one chess tournament when in fact it was another one.
It's a bit different to being just a racism, John. I mean, you know. I know what you're saying, and you do. You recognise that, and I've been there myself. When it, you know,
would you want things that you said in school?
I mean, I don't think I said anything in school like that, but you know, if I did, you know, you're putting yourself forward to be scrutinised, and that is what you have to face.
The problem.
The difference is the double standards of then, you know, saying about someone else, oh well, they were fully responsible for what they said and should be held to account as an adult, versus his situation now, and also that he's not being able to explain himself properly and get his story straight.
He hasn't quite got his story straight, has he?
Let me confess something. I was at university with Sajid Javid. I came from a white background. It was sort of very conventional. And then I was with a Muslim Asian guy. I was with Robert Halfon, a Jewish guy. And we were talking the other day. The banter we had, it's what boys do. I don't think it was anything malicious. But, you know, we acknowledge that's what boys did. They do it on the soccer field, they do it on the rugby field. And I think for us to scrutinise 50 years afterwards with different recollection of events, when these people were children, I think it's really low. I really think it's low.
I think the problem is that some of what he said feels like it
You don't
continues
know what
on.
he said. You're hearing different accounts.
Yeah, okay.
And he was
Some
a
of what
child.
he was
And he was a
alleged-
child.
Some of what he's alleged to have said has echoes in the party's policies today, and I think that is part of the reason that there is.
It's the opposite of that. If he's being accused of being anti-Jewish, I think you'll find it hard to find a politician more supportive of the Jewish community. So the reverse is true of what Hannah's just said.
OK, right, there's lots more to talk about. We'll come back to you shortly. That story, I'm sure, will feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the Associate Political Editor of The New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up, we stay with the Reform leader and look at the record £9 million donation made to Nigel Farage's party. You're watching the Politics Hub. Now, let's stay with reform and talk about the murky world of politics and money, something we don't really talk about. Donors don't much like being in the spotlight. This man is Christopher Harbon. We're not going to speak to him tonight. He won't be doing interviews. But over the years, he's given millions of pounds to Brexit before we left Europe, to Boris Johnson before he won an election, and now £9 million to reform. That is the largest single donation to a party by a living person. Most people won't know his name, but people like Christopher Harbon really do matter. And Sam Coates can tell us a bit more about who he is.
This man is the biggest political donor in the UK. But who is he? And why has he got two names? Well, we've just found out that he gave a whopping £9 million to Reform UK in August. That is a record single donation, aside from those who leave their money behind in wills. But who is he? His name is Christopher Harben, here on the left. He's been around in politics for quite a while. He made his money in the aviation fuel, defence and investment and in cryptocurrency industries. And here, as you can see, he is with Boris Johnson on a trip to Ukraine, meeting the mayor of Lviv. But Harben actually lives in Thailand, where he's got a second Thai name and a Thai passport. In this picture, you can see him giving a scholarship to a child at a wellness sanctuary, which he owns. 100,000 baht, just under £2,500. Let's have a listen to what he tells his guests there.
Yeah, one of the things that we try to help all of our guests at Kamalaya is change one thing on each visit. Mm-hmm. Just one thing.
Harben's changed a few things over the last few decades, and not just his name. Before 2019, he gave small amounts of money to the Conservatives, you can see there in the dark blue. But you can see from the launch of the Brexit Party in 2019 that he was giving them millions and millions in total. But then, under 2021, when Boris Johnson was in power, he gave more money to the Tories, bringing the total for them to just under £2 million. Now, look at this huge spike. This is the £9 million given to Reform. And it's not just his donations to the parties. He's actually also given over £60,000 to Nigel Farage's private office. And that included flying him out to Donald Trump's second inauguration. Here it is. So let's have a little bit of a listen to what Nigel Farage says about his relationship with Harben.
Does he want anything in return for his money? I promise you, absolutely nothing. Do I speak to him regularly? Maybe once a month, maybe once every 6 weeks, but certainly not more than that. And have I promised him anything? Hand on heart, I have not promised him a single thing in return for his donation.
So how does Harben stack up compared to other donors? Well, look at this. Here are all the donations to the former Brexit Party and to Reform UK since it was launched in late 2019, the Nigel Farage project of the last few years, effectively. And you can see that Christopher Harben is far and away the biggest donor, donating more than all the others combined. Coming in second, British businessman Jeremy Hoskin. He's down here with £1.7 million. But Harben, it's about 10 times, a bit more than that, of that amount. But how does this stack up for Reform compared to other parties, and why should you care? Well, this is a big donor breakthrough moment for Farage's party. They've got £30 million in the first 3 quarters of this year. It's a huge amount, and now that puts them more than Labour and topping the Tories. It could make a huge difference when it comes to the May elections, particularly in Scotland and Wales, and it might help Reform UK to turn its poll lead into real votes.
Right, let's bring Tim and Hannah back in. Hannah, does money guarantee success, do you think? I mean, it's a kind of barometer for who's doing well. It's interesting that he's moved to Reform.
I mean, it certainly helps. You know, I've been on the inside of many an election campaign, and it is tough when you are under-resourced, and there is a big challenge in politics, I think, at the moment, because of a lack of faith in politicians and a lack of faith in the political processes. And I think there are, I mean, your report says very clearly there are some questions about this individual, you know, having 2 names. Also, I think there's questions about donations coming from people who he might be a British citizen, but he doesn't live in the UK. I think there'll be a lot of people out there that have some concerns about that. But I guess for me, it's also what that money is going to be used for. We've already seen policies from Reform kind of eking towards the kind of Trumpian stuff, you know, anti-abortion, anti-LGBT rights, you know, anti-human rights, and that money will supercharge those campaigns. And that, for me, as a queer person and as somebody who wants to see us go forward and be more progressive, is hugely concerning.
I don't know what policies you're talking about. I don't see that at all, and I wouldn't.
But I guess you know the thing for Reform is they are a start-up party. You know, unlike Labour, they don't have the guarantee of money from unions. They need money for the ground game as well, not just online advertising. They need boots on the ground, people to actually go out and.
Well, I think one of the reasons why this matters is that one thing that Kemi Badenoch has been able to say about the Conservative Party, there's not much success that she can point to. The Conservative Party's opinion poll ratings, their own personal opinion ratings, are quite low. But the Conservative Party have been able to say they've been raising money. And Reform have struggled a bit with reforming money, with earning money. And the big thing, of course, that's powerful in Reform is we now have nearly 300,000 members. I think in the next year or two we will overtake Labour and will be the biggest party in the United Kingdom. So there is a broad base of support there for Reform. We're ahead in the opinion polls. We've replaced Labour as the party of the working class. And what we have lacked is money to build on that.
They disagree with that, but carry on.
Pardon?
They disagree with that, but carry on.
But if you look at how working class people vote, that absolutely more working class people now vote for Reform than Labour. Labour shouldn't be called Labour anymore. It's no longer the party of Labour. And Reform have won that. But as we're an outsider party still, trying to build the success that we want, this money will help. And I know Nigel Farage takes a very strong view about not buying anything. And he was very anti-Elon Musk giving money to Reform because he worried about the direction that Elon Musk was going in. So, you know, the challenge is that Labour, they're the party that take money from unions. And it's absolutely clear what unions get in return for their money. They get the kind of employment legislation that's now going to stop a lot of employers taking on more people.
And what's Mr Harben getting then?
Well, I don't think he's getting anything. I've not noticed any... I don't know him for a start, so I wouldn't know what he'd been asking for. But I think Nigel Farage is very principled on not accepting a link between money and donations and policy.
It's all a bit murky, is it, Hannah?
It is, and I think if I was in the Conservatives, and I think people in the Conservatives will be, you know, pretty concerned and teed off. I mean, they're taking some of their MPs, they're taking their councillors, they're taking their political clothing. I mean, Reform to me feels like the Tories in wolves' clothing. Now they're taking their donors as well. So. And there's even been a discussion about a pact because even with the polls where they are, they would still, the Reform would need another party to be in coalition or an arrangement with. And it will be interesting to see how that plays because the Tories were so toxic at the last election. I mean, that's really why Labour won. You wonder how short people's memories will be and if they realise that actually in voting for Reform, they're really just voting for the Conservatives to come in by the back door.
You say it all looks a bit murky. I'd like to see your evidence for why it's murky.
Well, I'm saying, you know, politics...
There is no link at all established between this money that's supported and what Reform are doing. And so I think you have to be a little bit careful about saying it's murky.
I'm not saying this exact instance is murky, but I'm saying, you know, there's a lot that we don't know about donors and they have a powerful position in British politics. Anyway, thank you both. We will come back to you. One of the areas that Labour would like to point to as a success is the NHS. However, the latest snapshot has provided a worrying insight into the strain it is under. The number of people in hospital with the flu is more than 50% higher than this time last year, and nurses have warned patients are being set up to suffer this winter, facing 12-hour waits in A&E. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi reports.
Maneuver again. Paul rushed himself to A&E, struggling to breathe and with a sharp pain in his chest. He thought it was his heart. Instead, doctors discovered pneumonia.
I thought the end was near, I'll be honest. But...
You thought you were going to die?
I really did, yes.
Do you know, every winter, the doctors and the government and everyone else is telling us about respiratory illnesses. Yeah. When you used to see those news reports, did you ever think it was this serious?
Not really, I'll be honest. It's like anything, isn't it? Until it happens to you.
Staff at the Royal Preston Hospital are under pressure. Flu season has hit harder and earlier, and resident doctor strikes are coming.
Flu certainly started coming in, all the other respiratory viruses. The hospital's getting busier, the emergency department's getting busier, the EMS service is getting busier, so pressure's building up very much as we anticipate. And as we've seen before, every year's just that little bit harder than the one before.
Ambulance teams are warning of a high number of calls, the sort of numbers they usually see on New Year's Eve.
It's a midweek morning and this emergency department is already heaving with patients. Almost every bed there has been taken up. There are patients waiting through the reception area. They're waiting to be seen. And almost every bay here has got a patient in it already. And there are more patients in the corridors just around the corner. What I've seen from walking around is it seems to me that nearly every patient here is quite elderly. And these are the patients who are most susceptible to these winter viruses, RSV and flu. And when there's pressure building up in here with patients, that pressure then transfers throughout the rest of the hospital. What do the numbers tell you? What does the data tell you?
It's been a very tough winter already, and I fear for what's going to happen in the next few weeks.
Almost 17 million people in England have taken a flu vaccine this winter, but less than half of all frontline NHS staff have opted for the jab.
Generally, there is a lot of vaccine hesitancy, isn't there, among NHS staff?
Correct, which is unfortunate, because the way to protect our patients and ourselves and the staff and our families
and the
is
rest
to
of
get
the community.
vaccinated. Absolutely.
Can I quickly have a... Can you please ring 2323 and ask...
The team is trying to move Paul out of bed, but his heart rate climbs to over 150 beats per minute. That's the same as if he'd been running. Paul's hopeful he'll be back home in time for Christmas, but first he'll have to get much better. Ashish Joshi, Sky News in Preston.
Okay, everything is right.
Well, if he didn't have enough problems, the Prime Minister is also being accused of subverting democracy by delaying 4 new mayoral elections until 2028. The formal reason given is that more time is needed to reorganise local government in the areas of Greater Essex, Norfolk and Suffolk, Hampshire and the Solent and Sussex and Brighton. However, opposing parties are not buying it.
We're going to need an elected figure in local politics to actually explain to people why they're being asked to vote year after year after year. So you really could say to yourself, there is absolutely no reason why these elections should not go ahead. But then there is, of course, one very big reason why these elections should not go ahead, and there's no prizes for guessing. But it is an electoral calculus put out their figures just a couple of hours ago that Reform would have won all 4 of these contests and would have won them quite comfortably. The government are basically committing electoral fraud upon the electorate, who had every opportunity to put Reform mayors in place.
I think it is a scandal that the local elections are being cancelled or postponed yet again. And the excuse that it's about local government reorganisation doesn't wash. They've had plenty of time to do this. What we're seeing is a Labour government that wasn't actually ready for government, and they've come in and they're making up their plans as they go along. People need their democracy. They want to have a chance to vote for their local representatives, and I support them. This is not something that should be happening.
Right, let's bring Hannah and Tim back in. I think I've got a feeling I know what you're going to say.
Look, I agree for the first time this evening.
Shock. Oh, no, that's boring. Hannah, look, I guess, the argument from government is they're doing this big reorganisation of local authorities. They need to make sure everything's working, don't they, before actually electing people?
Yeah, I've got some sympathy for that, because they were left a complete mess when the Tories left government, and particularly in local government, which has been grossly underfunded. And, we should not underestimate the importance of local government in delivering services to people. Absolutely. That being said, it feels strangely convenient that these were areas where Reform were doing really well and potentially going to win. And to me, it hands a win to Reform and gives them exactly the opportunity that they've had today. Nigel Farage standing up saying, it's electoral fraud and you're sort of gerrymandering it. I don't know the truth of it, but if it seems a certain way and it's being punted, it gives Reform an opportunity, which they are very good at. Nigel Farage is very good at jumping on a bandwagon and spinning a line. And it definitely feels strange and uncomfortable. But I have some sympathy with the situation they're in. And one thing that we do know from a Scottish perspective, because we had challenges with the way elections were run in the past with electronic voting and things, that you want your elections to be fair, you want them to be delivered well. And if that's not possible, then maybe that is the real reason.
I mean, it's not necessarily going to change the big picture, is it?
No, but I'm glad, because people will say, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I appreciate Hannah being honest about that, actually, because she has no dog in the fight. It happened last year, and it's happened again this year. Councils where Reform, all the opinion polls suggested we will win, are being postponed. I just asked a fair-minded viewer to think, why is that? The local government reorganisation is a thing, but...
They're not being cancelled, we should make clear.
No, well, they're being postponed. They've been cancelled this year, postponed until next year. And they're all in Reform, areas where Reform is winning. Let viewers decide what's going on there, and I think it'll be pretty clear.
Although people might look at the way that councils like Kent County Council, where Reform are in, have been run, which has been pretty disastrous, and they've been run into the ground, and think, well, maybe folk are actually going to get let off the hook a bit.
Tim, what do you think?
Let voters decide.
Is Kent County Council being well run?
I think what's happening in local government is that Reform have lots of new councillors who've never done politics before. Some are doing well. There's lots of savings beginning to come through from some councils. Some are not doing so well. But that is true of local government generally. And some councils, dare I say it, some SNP councillors are better than other SNP councillors. And local voters better decide that afterwards. What is wrong is if local voters aren't given the opportunity to even vote, or their vote is being delayed by a year. That's the problem.
Thank you both. And we're going to come back to you very shortly. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Cat Burns topped the Google trends for 2025. But we'll tell you what big political moments cut through as well.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter? Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking...
Thank you so much.
...trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Anybody else?
Should the Defence Secretary and the Vice...
Wait, what country are you
from? From the UK.
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Sky News, get the full story first. Free wherever you get your news. Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
Google has published its trends for the year, giving a snapshot of the people and the events that captured our attention in 2025. And while it may be no surprise that Traitors star Cat Burns topped the list, less surprisingly, politicians didn't really feature that heavily. Fear not, we've taken a deep dive into the data ourselves and we have seen who has trended in Westminster. That is this graph right here. So you might be able to see the different colours represent the different parties. So red for Labour Keir Starmer, blue for Kemi Badenoch, the turquoise for Nigel Farage, and the black is Rachel Reeves. Let's bring Tim and Hannah back in. I'm sorry the SNP and the Lib Dems aren't on here, but these are the most Googled politicians. Do you have any guesses as to what some of those spikes might be? You see that big Rachel Reeves spike in the middle?
Was that the crying in Parliament?
Yes, well done, well done. Yeah, that is it, the crying in Parliament.
Well, it was a real moment. I don't think we still really know what happened. It's Yeah, and I think that's the perplexity is still.
Yeah, it was after.
Persists, yeah.
It's also just really awful to see a woman being treated like that. You know, her face being plastered everywhere,
Yeah.
and equally at the time, I remember having a debate and a discussion about the fact that there was obviously something distressing going on, whether it was to do with what was happening on the back benches, something personal, but that she didn't. If it was something personal, that she maybe didn't feel like she could just bow out for the day. You know,
it was right after the welfare bill, but we don't know what it was about. But it shows, doesn't it, that. Sometimes it is these sort of personal pictures rather than the actual budget. I mean, that's at the end there. You can see a bit of a spike there. But often it's these images that cut through rather than...
But I think that's almost twice as high
policy.
as almost any other politician other than Keir Starmer in this chart. And
I mean, Nigel Farage, you've got to admit, he is doing quite well on these trends. He's right under Keir Starmer and he's got 5 MPs in Parliament.
Well, and I think these set-piece press conferences, and he did that all through the summer, when Labour seemed to be hiding from themselves, really, and it cuts through.
And Tim, Kemi Badenoch, she's tipping up a bit, isn't she?
Kemi who?
Kemi not registering on the Richter scale.
Well, look, Badenoch, she's got a little peak because she seems to have cut through.
I think, to be fair to her, I think she's doing a bit better at the moment. I think she's found her voice, and I think she's less. One of the reasons why I left the Conservative Party was she had a record for being very confrontational with people, staff, colleagues, journalists, and I think she's being a little bit lighter now and a bit more open to advice, and I think that works for her.
Who do you think, apart from yourself, who do you think is cutting through most in the SNP at the moment?
I mean, Stephen Flynn gets a really good outing in Parliament, and I think it's interesting that after the election, it was fascinating to see people's reaction and the numbers that were tuning in to Ed Davey being, the leader of the third party versus Stephen. And Stephen still, I think, commands the House very, very well. What's interesting is at the time when we got elected...
do you think?
There's definitely the potential. But I think when we got elected in 2015 in that large number, I remember somebody telling us that they put in extra cameras just to keep an eye on us and see what we were up to. And somebody from the BBC told us that the politics channel had this massive uptick, that we were a different and diverse bunch. And I think that for me, obviously I'm going to say that, but that's sad that we're in a much smaller group now. But I think Stephen still does a really good job, and I think John Swinney has steadied the ship in Scotland. But we have a lot of really talented people, Mary McCallan, who I think was on recently, Jenny Gilruth. We've got a diverse range of voices, and we're about to have an election in Scotland. It's like the UK media is just starting to wake up to that. But it will give you something extra to talk about other than Westminster politics.
And let's end on a friendly note. Tim, who do you think, apart from in your party Reform, who is the politician that's cutting through the most at the moment?
Who's cutting through at the moment? I think probably Wes Streeting. We've mentioned him earlier in a negative light, but in a positive light, it does talk a language that people understand.
Yeah. OK, thank you both so much. We're out of time, unfortunately. That is it from us tonight. We are going to be back on Monday at 7 o'clock. Up next, it is UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Mead, but we will see you on Monday for the Politics Hub.